Whose teaching experience is always a 100% peaceful and blissful paradise? Nobody's. Whose teaching experience, at least sometimes, presents obstacles that make it anything but a 100% peaceful and blissful paradise? Yours, mine, and everyone else's too. Does anyone know what it's like to share your passion for the language you teach with the kids in your classroom when the reality of it is that they just don't care? The only reason why they're in your class is because someone else says they have to be. Or you teach a conversational Spanish class to adult learners. As you see it, TPRS and other comprehensible input-based approaches really are what's more tried and true. They are ultimately the best way to foster language acquisition in such a way that your learners are able to get it more practically and more efficiently. And yet, there are some in your classroom for whom the more traditional skills-based approaches are still like a kind of comfort food. They expect you to spend more class time on their questions about grammar, even sometimes really being kind of high maintenance about it. Then there was one colleague I met a couple of years ago who returned from a sabbatical to the college where she taught, only then to discover that she had been fired. The reason why? In a class subsequent to hers, in which she had taught with TPRS, several of her students had not been able to understand directions given by the instructor of the latter class. The directions had been to conjugate several verbs. Apparently, to the latter instructor's astonishment, these students had all actually come from a prior class in a lower division sequence, actually not readily knowing what it means to conjugate a verb. That all of these students still would have been capable of applying any of these verbs in a real-life communicative context, that was beside the point. Hanging in there or giving up, what could something like any of these, understandably, make you feel like doing? But keep this in mind. Straightforward stick-to-itiveness sets the stage for sacred satisfaction. Consider iPhones or iPads or other similar devices. Does anyone here ever wonder how we got by without them before we had them? Anyone know about Steve Jobs, to whom we have to thank for them? Did you know that the Apple III, the first computer he designed, which was the precursor to the Mac, was unreliable? Among other things because of its tendency to crash because of poor ventilation. At one point, he was actually fired from Apple, a company he actually co-founded. And yet, he went on to design the NEXT hardware, which eventually became the foundation for the Apple products we have now, including the iPad and the iPhone. Where might we be had he not persevered to the end? Then there's Bill Bowerman, the University of Oregon's legendary track coach, who also invented the original Nike running shoes. What if he'd called it good for the first time? after ruining his wife's waffle iron by pouring urethane rubber on it, or all the waffle irons he managed to wreck after that one before he finally got the soul that resulted in Nike's multi-million-dollar worldwide success. After flunking out of high school at age 16, what if Albert Einstein had not continued to pursue his interest in calculus and physics? What if our own Steve Krashen, for some reason, had fallen flat on his face and said, "Forget it with this comprehensible input stuff"? What could that have very well meant for all of us? Finally, remember what Jesus suffered on the cross and what we have in him as a result. Straightforward stick-to-itiveness sets the stage for sacred satisfaction. Today, I would like to look at some wisdom from chapter 1 of James. James, the writer of this particular New Testament epistle, is believed to be the half-brother of Jesus. It is considered part of the wisdom literature of Scripture, focusing specifically on where the rubber meets the road, pointing out how theological teachings, as covered elsewhere in Scripture, are applicable in everyday life. This relates to how our actions as followers of Christ are evidence of faith in him, evidence of the faith in him we have as we follow, including, here especially, how we respond to trials or things that come up in life, even everyday life, that have a way of keeping it from always being smooth and easy. Verses 2 through 4 of chapter 1 read as follows. "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Perseverance. The original Greek term in context for this is hupomone. Its meaning has to do with endurance or patience, waiting patiently or steadfastly, especially in relation to something specifically endured with patience. This is what we're letting finish its work as we put up with being put to the test. To finish its work. This kind of reminds me of how we classify some past tenses of the languages we teach as perfect and others as imperfect. In other words, to clarify whether a sequence of an action in the past was happening in progress over time, or that it happened and then reached its conclusion. Likewise, in the original text, the meaning of letting perseverance finish its work has to do with reaching a conclusion. The original meaning of the term is rendered as having its perfect result. It has to do with letting something run its full scope, letting it reach the end of its course, as opposed to giving up, darse por vencido, bailing out, throwing in the towel, and going home. That you may be mature. What does the term mature mean? It means ripe. Think about it. Why do we tend to prefer to eat fruit that is ripe versus before it's ripe? And complete, not lacking in anything. Complete implies entire or whole. Not lacking has to do with nothing left behind, that you might have everything you might need for something greater later. As Matthew Henry expressed it, this is when our work of endurance or patience is complete, when we are more complete and more enabled to persevere to the end. By having gone through it, we have available to us wisdom that we might draw from and apply in facing a later situation for results more optimal. It's a sort of satisfaction that you have passed God's test. So when we find ourselves in a difficult situation, let's say students might be bad-mouthing you around the school. Let's say it's just because they don't think your style of classroom management is cool. Because of it, the administration, even under parental pressure, is making you sweat through a microscopically detailed explanation of how you go about it. Why might it be the better option for an aspiring teacher to stick it out to the very end? How might going through it now be helpful to you later? How might it even be the greater responsibility? Straightforward stick-to-itiveness sets the stage for sacred satisfaction. Along the lines of what we've been talking about, there are going to be times when life will put us to the test, especially in what we do. In spite of however it makes you feel when it happens, what wisdom might it bring forth for you to consider for later, for how to even better handle things the next time you see a similar situation coming about? Though at first you might possibly be sadder, how might it make you wiser for later on? Straightforward stick-to-itiveness sets the stage for sacred satisfaction. Whose teaching experience is always a 100% peaceful and blissful paradise? Nobody's. Whose teaching experience at least sometimes presents obstacles that make it anything but a 100% peaceful and blissful paradise? Yours, mine, and everyone else's too. Hanging in there or giving up, what could any of it understandably make you feel like doing? Even so, how might we see therein the complementary opportunities to find the wisdom God has for us, from which we might benefit for tomorrow? Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Straightforward stick-to-itiveness sets the stage for sacred satisfaction.